Hello and welcome to On the House. My name is Michael Wilt. I am the host of the On the House podcast today. This is T-Shack's podcast where we discuss all things housing. We started off with making this a home ownership focused podcast, but lately we've been expanding into rental topics, into other housing adjacent topics as well. We pretty much cover everything at this point. And today's topic will lend itself to a discussion surrounding home ownership and some other housing issues as well. And it's actually a legislative session preview. This is our second panel that's focused on home ownership. We had an earlier session focused on multifamily, the rental side of things. And for those of you that don't know, Texas is probably a little unique in that our legislature only meets 5 months every 2 years. And within that 5 months, really, the bulk of the work is done in about 90 days or 3 months, really. So there's a whole lot of work to get accomplished in a really short amount of time. And it's certainly an interesting time to be an observer of the Capitol or to be within it during that period. And I'm joined by two guests who are going to be talking about their respective roles at the Capitol and the organizations that they represent. I'm joined by Meredyth Fowler and Trey Bates. It's good to have both of you on here, and I'll let them introduce themselves, and we'll just kick things off by talking about your tenure at the Capitol, what that looks like, what you've done over the years, and what you currently do. And let's start with you, Meredyth.
Sure. Hi, I'm Meredyth Fowler, the new general counsel for Texas Mortgage Bankers Association. My predecessor, John Fleming, was there for about 15 years, I think. So I've got some big shoes to fill. Prior to Fleming was the legend himself, Larry Taylor. So I've got two legends to follow. So hopefully I'm going to do a good job. I started out in August of 2000, hired by Brian McCall out of the Plano area. I worked for him for about a year and left and went to law school, and then came back and worked for Peggy Hamrick as her general counsel / chief of staff. I left her office in November of 2006. She had run for Senate, and I think there were like 5 or 6 people in that election. Dan Patrick actually won that seat, so she retired. And in 2006, that November, I moved over to work for Senator Kevin Eltife out of Tyler, and worked for him until about February of 2008. And I went out to lobby for about 11 months and then got sucked back into the Capitol to go work for Speaker Joe Strauss. I was in his policy shop from, February of 2009 until November 2015. And I got plucked away by the Independent Bankers Association and worked for them for almost 7 years and left them in, September of 22 to join Texas Cable Association. So I switched it up from banking and covering banking in the legislature to do something completely different. And then I got a call this past May out of the blue that Fleming was retiring, and so they were enticing me to come over, and it worked. So I joined Texas Mortgage Bankers in early July. So brand new, drinking from a fire hose, but figuring it out.
I'm sure you have a comprehensive understanding of housing at this point after 6 months of exposure to it.
Totally. Got it
Trey, tell us about yourself and your history at the Capitol.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. And so I'll go back to basically 2004, 2007-ish, when I was a involved member of the Texas Realtors as a realtor licensee, involved in commercial real estate, and but I was very involved in the governmental affairs side of our volunteer organization, all the way up until the point when I became chairman of the board for Texas Realtors in 2019. And all throughout that experience, I'd worked with our governmental affairs, leading our grassroots efforts, and doing so much that I guess Mark Lehman, the legend, previous to my position here, he basically looked at me and said, Trey, you ought to consider getting involved in this. And he was looking to retire as well. And so that's and I said, no, I'm good. I like doing my career thing, and I enjoy playing in this stuff. But he convinced me that that was a role that fit well. And so I looked into that and been involved with Texas Realtors on the staff side now, vice president of governmental affairs, leading our entire governmental affairs arm since 2019.
So realtor / advocate turned staffer.
That's right.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a little bit unique. You don't see that a terrible amount, but it was interesting because I enjoyed being on the grassroots side, being involved in all the campaigns, all the things we did across the state, and then leading our state efforts as a volunteer, as the chairman of our political involvement council, and then all the way up and through the leadership side. So they said that seemed to work for them, and it's been great. I've enjoyed it. It's been there since 2019, so this will be our fourth session. I'm already losing count. But anyway, the point is it's been a great experience. Got a great team, and we get involved in a lot of housing issues, just as you would imagine, from just private property rights to just general housing and commercial properties as well, and all various aspects of real estate.
That's great. I want to talk about your organizations a little bit. You represent the realtors. I think y'all might be the biggest trade organization in the country. Is that correct?
That's correct. As far as number of people involved, yes.
Sure. So you got a lot of volunteers, a lot of people who are interested in the political process. Tell me about what the lead-in to session looks like for the Realtor Association.
Well, I'll tell you, we've been working on that all throughout this year. So every interim, we have a policy process that has four major public policy areas that our members are focused on. So it could be from just general business issues to land use, taxation, and then infrastructure. And so all of the different things that we look into kind of flow through those pathways. And we've studied everything you could dream of all throughout this last year up until now, where we have a book of 80 some odd plus policy positions that have a very specific idea of where we want to go with those things. And it's been fully vetted by our volunteer membership structure and all through our committee structures. And so it's a very grassroots driven process, including all of our members at home all across the state of Texas. We have over 150,000 members just in Texas alone, and they are located in every elective district. So they have a lot to say.
That's like having gold in your pocket when you can pluck away a realtor from Midland and bring them to a hearing and they're kind of addressing their representative. It's so hard for a lot of these advocacy organizations to identify volunteers in certain districts. So it must be really not necessarily easy for you all, but kind of a blessing to have so many members that no matter where you are in the state, you can bring someone from someone's district.
I agree. We're really blessed. We have members everywhere. They're all engaged. And if you've ever met your local realtor, they know everybody in the neighborhood.
Right.
They know everybody in the community. They know everything about everybody. And they're the best people to have in your grassroots activities because they can certainly have a large network that they can tap into to help with whatever the effort is, either locally or even statewide.
Sure. So Meredyth, slightly less than 150,000 people in your organization, probably, I'm assuming. What does the lead in to session look like for TMBA?
It's somewhat similar, following things all throughout the year, paying attention to interim hearings. When I started at TMBA, I think it was about a month and a half in, I started doing bi-weekly reports to go to our membership to talk about the interim hearings, what's being discussed, kind of summaries of the hearings and the different issues and sort of the take on and the general sentiment of the interim charges. And so we'll talk about that all throughout the year. And then the executive committee is essentially the legislative committee. And not that other people can't bring issues to us because they do all the time, but that's kind of where everything flows through. So before our board meeting in the summer, the general counsel, me now, will come up with issues and kind of lay out, here's, some things the legislature's talked about. Lots of times interim charges do lead to legislation. So I'll kind of preview like things that I think we'll see. We'll decide the EC and I will discuss, do we need to be proactive on anything? And then during the board meeting, which is usually the next day, we'll talk about all the things with the board. Everybody can weigh in. And then throughout the session, I'll do the bi-weekly reports will become weekly. And I've got members, they'll email me all the time or text me or call me and say, hey, what about this issue? What are you hearing about that? This just came to mind. So it's a constant flow of information from the EC, from all the board members. It's kind of an open door policy. And I encourage people, if you've got a question about anything, just call me, email me, text me. I'll tell you, what I hear, what's going on. If I don't know the answer, I'll figure it out and I'll get back to you. So pretty much an open door. Anything is kind of up for discussion.
Got it. I want to know about the priorities you all have identified, if you're comfortable talking about them. But we're going to set that aside for a little bit because I feel like when we dive into some of these issues, we might cover some of your priorities. And if there's anything that we haven't hit, then we'll hit that after we get through some of this policy discussion. And so let's get into the policy discussion because I've covered. I've been around the legislature for 20 plus years. I've covered housing for, I think, 7 sessions. And at the beginning of that time, it was hard to talk about housing because it was really, I should say, housing affordability. And in the morning conversation, I think this is important to note, right? Because affordable housing and housing affordability are two distinct issues. And when we were talking on the rental side, a lot of that is about affordable housing as a product. And on the home ownership side, I feel like the conversation really lends itself to housing affordability, the taxes, the insurance, everything that goes into that impacts Texans, no matter the type of housing that they live in, they're really going to be impacted by this. So in terms of level setting, we're probably going to be talking more about the cost of housing as it impacts Texans every day. And but those conversations were still not necessarily hard to have 14 years ago. They just weren't at top of mind for legislators. But I think now it's become an issue that's not just exclusive to Austin or to expensive areas to live. This is impacting small urban markets, rural areas, everything. And so when you walk into an office now, it's probably a top 3 issue, like across every single member's district. And for that reason, it is a conversation that's being had among the leadership, among lieutenant governor, governor, speaker, certainly committee chairs. So given what you've heard, do you think there's going to be alignment on 2 or 3 housing, home ownership oriented issues that the leadership really gets behind? We'll start with you, Trey.
Oh, absolutely. I like you said, every meeting I've had, it comes up. It's probably one of the top 2 items that comes up. Now, maybe it's because they're talking to realtors or something like that, but the point is it's a key issue that's coming up with every elected official we've met with in the last few weeks, the last month easily. Even more so than last session. We talked about it quite a bit last session, but last session it was almost like it was kind of a growing idea. Going into this session, I feel very strongly that this is going to be a top priority among the leadership. I think there's not one silver bullet that'll fix the problem. I think what I've been saying to elected officials is there's going to be a little bit of multiple tools in the toolbox that we're going to have to deploy to help work towards a housing affordability issue. The problem is it's multifolded, and we're trying to figure out, there's not one way to fix it all, because whether it's a zoning issue or a permitting issue or funding or different types of issues that are, playing into development or the lack thereof, or the length of time it takes to develop, to put additional housing on the ground. We have over 1,300 people a day moving into Texas. So we're still not meeting the demand. So that demand curve is still steep, and it's driving that housing cost up. And so even though we're starting to see more movement with more sellers in the market, it's not enough. And so there's a whole lot of reason why we need to help the development of new housing. And when I look at housing affordability, it's kind of an all the tools on the toolbox on the table, including housing affordability in its most traditional sense. It's a part of that. And then it's also everything else we can do to make housing available to Texans.
Thanks, Trey. Meredyth, do you think there's going to be alignment behind 2 or 3 different housing policies?
Oh, I don't know. The legislature is hard to predict. Like Trey said, I totally agree with everything he said. I think it's top of mind for legislators now, and I think they're personally experiencing these issues themselves, especially the increased insurance costs and maybe some insurers, not renewing books and, having to shop around for different insurance and seeing, for themselves what they've been hearing from their constituents. As far as alignment, we don't know who the speaker is going to be.
Right.
So, that'll be interesting to see. But I think there is agreement among the current big 3 and most likely the, speaker to come in, lieutenant governor and governor, that this is an issue. a very serious issue. And I think, just like Trey said, there's a multitude of ways that we can help address the issue. What those policies are going to look like, I don't know yet, but we'll be watching and we'll be all involved in those communications, those meetings, hoping to help come up with resolutions.
Okay. Well, we're going to get in. Oh, go ahead,
I'm
Trey.
just going to add that I think that there's going to be a push from leadership to ask the people involved in housing and all of those different facets of housing that they're going to ask us to kind of endorse somewhat of a package of proposals out there that I've already been approached to see if we can help assemble something like that. So I'd be curious to see how that's going to play out. But there's a whole lot of good ideas out there. We're just trying to figure out how to put it together.
We'll get into some of those ideas actually right now. I did want to say, though, that we're recording this in mid-December. We don't know who the speaker is going to be. So if you're listening to this in January, hopefully we'll have a speaker identified by then, around the time that they gavel in or a little bit before. Certainly some interesting times. And so let's get into some of these specific policy issues. And there was a Senate local government hearing in November that Chairman Betancourt presided over, dedicated to housing. There were definitely some themes that emerged. I want to go through them kind of one by one and hear from y'all if you think the legislature is going to address any of these through legislation. And we'll start with the first. We've already touched upon this, and almost everyone agreed that limited housing supply is the culprit for our state's for housing affordability challenges. Do you foresee any legislative interventions to increase the supply of housing, and what would that look like? Meredyth, we'll start with you on this one.
Oh gosh, I think we probably will try and see that, because I think there's probably consensus. And with the different interim hearings, I think B and I had a hearing on this where they were looking at affordability as part of the charge as well. I think consensus-wise, people are understanding it's property taxes, it's insurance, it's lack of supply. So I think there's consensus around the problems, around the solutions. Hopefully there will be some consensus. And again, we would love to be involved in those conversations and help, shepherd those ideas through. I think I saw a bill that's been filed, and I think it's more specific to a certain area of the state in which that legislator has his district located, but ADUs, I think are addressed in that legislation. I think also in the local government hearing, I believe there was discussion about regulations from cities and counties that kind of slow down, especially permitting processes, slow down the building. If we can get some of that relaxed, the more supply we can get more quickly into the market, I think the more easing that we'll have, on prices and, availability, and people willing to, take another look at buying if, they can see prices coming down, a little more confidence in the market. So hopefully that'll help spur. Hopefully there'll be consensus on good ideas.
Sure. I was going to get into land use regulation and zoning. You kind of touched upon that. Trey, maybe if you want to take those as a combo, right? Because to the extent that you can provide some deregulation, maybe some more favorable zoning or less time-intensive zoning cases, that can certainly spur the production of housings. Do you think that's probably where the legislature might intervene as on the land use, regulatory side of things, zoning side of things to help spur production?
I think they will. I think they've made attempts in those same areas in the past. They've looked at like what we refer to as the shot clock bill, to look at permitting timeframes and try to create less reasons to lengthen or take it longer for someone to go through that process. Because at the end of the day, time is money, regardless of whatever the fees are for the permit. It's the length of time it takes to get through that decision process, that uncertainty of that length of time, because municipalities can indefinitely kind of extend. So you never know when you're going to be able to put a lot on the ground. That's the hardest thing for a developer to absorb, is that unknown time and then money, because at some point the interest rate on those dollars starts kicking in, and then that becomes a real expense, because there's funding tranches that they have to meet, and all of those things factor into it that sometimes municipalities are not really paying attention to. They're just more focused on their process, much less not so much looking out for their community in a way that they are looking out for their community, but in a way that sometimes they're getting so much growth, they almost want to ignore it or just they're happy with where they are. And I think that's the perspective that elected officials kind of look at municipalities sometimes with a need to help them expedite the process instead of just kind of making it slower. So I'm kind of stepping out there a little bit by saying stuff like that, but I think the idea there is because I'm trying to get in the heads of where the elected officials are, and I can't guess, but I'm thinking that's kind of based on past experience, what they've done with things like trying to shorten the permit process, trying to remove regulatory input from the municipalities, and just say it is what it is. Go. I think you'll see some of that again.
Absolutely. So the shot clock bill that Trey's referring to was passed last session. It basically provides that time certainty in order to get your permit reviewed by a city. And if they don't meet that time, then you can ask for a third party review. But it definitely gives that certainty, right, to a housing developer of it has to take this much time or else this is the relief that I'm offered or provided. I know y'all aren't in the, or your members, maybe some of them aren't in the housing product development side of things. You're in the transactional side of things. But anecdotally, have you heard anything out there about how that shot clock bill is working in practice?
We do have a number of members that get involved in developments as well. So there have been some feedback that some cities are looking at that of opportunities to reset the clock. So that there has been a few things that we have heard anecdotally back that said it's not exactly working as designed. So there may be some looks into that possibly if that's a pervasive problem that we're seeing.
Sure. We talked about insurance a little bit. Let's expand on that a little bit. It's skyrocketed for homeowners, multifamily property owners, everyone. This is not a problem that's unique to Texas. It's a problem everyone's dealing with across the country. And it's more acute in certain areas like the coastal areas of Florida and also disaster prone areas across the country and in some parts of Texas as well. But everybody is feeling the brunt of high insurance rates. And policymakers might be scratching their head as to what their role is in this, if any. Do you think that there's some legislation that could be advanced to help with insurance relief? Meredyth, we'll start with you.
I think they're taking this very seriously and looking into it. Both the House and the Senate had interim charges on this issue. And again, I think they're experiencing it personally themselves as well. So I think they are going to try and come up with ways to address this. As the real estate trades with also the apartments and the builders and some of the insurance companies got together like a couple weeks ago, get in a room to just kind of talk about what our industries are hearing, what we're seeing, and also to make sure everybody knows who everybody is and who represents what and who's going to be concerned about what piece of the puzzle. I know that, like I said, the legislature is very concerned about this, and I know they have to be walking on a tightrope because you don't want to push too hard and have insurers pull out of Texas. Sure. I've heard anecdotally there are some companies kind of pulling out. I had to testify in front of Senate B and C when they looked into this issue. And in preparing for that, I was talking to our board members, and then also I talked to one of the board members hooked me up with one of their friends who's in the insurance business, and they were saying that their reinsurers are basically telling them, you got to figure out ways to help your costs. So you need to start bundling. Also, we're not going to renew half your book, so those customers are going to have to go shop around. Us in the mortgage industry, our hands are a little bit tied because all we can really do is tell our customers to ask good questions, really take a look at the policy, shop around. If we can try and help answer any questions, we'll be happy to do that. But really just be sure and mindful about what the policy covers, what it doesn't cover. Ask if they're going to offer any discounts for, like a 5-foot rock barrier sort of around your property where vegetation doesn't come up to it. Do they offer any discounts for like ring cameras or any discounts for storm windows, hardening kind of stuff? Anything we can think of to get them, to ask questions about possible discounts and, just asking good questions and shopping around and making sure that you know exactly what the policy is offering. Hopefully there'll be something done. I think more and more legislators are looking into this issue and hearing from their constituents. Again, what those policies are going to look like, I have no idea. But hopefully we can get something that would be helpful.
Sure. So really educating consumers, knowing that this is something you have to have. You really need to be as educated as possible when it comes to any savings or discounts you can identify, but just
Yeah, yeah,
consumer
and
app.
especially like for first-time home buyers, because it's also very overwhelming, and you're not entirely sure how the process works.
Right.
Often, you're not entirely sure what question to ask. Um, if we can be, if our people can be a partner in that, and kind of shepherd them to like think about this, think about that. That's one area where we can help, because we do hear from, especially those with escrow accounts, when we're saying, hey, you're not quite enough money, we need some more money in here. Oftentimes they're like, what? Like, I got a fixed rate 30
Right.
year, and we're like, it's the property taxes and insurance. Like, it's it's not us. It's the country is having more weather events, and it's kind of spread out amongst everybody. Everybody's kind of feeling it, but yeah, our hands are a little bit tied as far as from the mortgage industry, specific ways that we can, lower those costs. But we're trying. We're trying to, look at every angle, look at who we could partner with, be involved in those discussions as much as possible.
Yeah, for first time home buyers, it's a lot of sticker shock, right? You're thinking
Yeah.
I'm just paying my mortgage note, but really it's your principal, it's the interest, it's the taxes, it's the insurance. And when you look at it broken down, you're like, wait, I'm only contributing that much to the principal, right? I'm
Yeah.
only building this equity out of my entire payment, but
Mhm.
it's a necessary thing. Trey, any rumblings about legislative interventions in insurance? What are you hearing?
I was at the same hearing that Meredith was at, and some of that conversation ended up in the TWIA world because that affects the state, because that's a state quasi-governmental entity.
Wind insurance, right? For
Wind
people that
insurance
don't,
for the
yeah.
coastal area, so it only affects the two counties deep along the Texas coast, and so everyone outside of that area just does their normal homeowners insurance, and it covers tornadoes, windstorms, all that stuff within your homeowner policy. But on the coast and within those two counties, you have to have a windstorm policy in addition to your homeowner policy. And so that's an organization the state created that is covering that because, like we were talking about just a moment ago, most insurers were leaving the state, and so under the windstorm issue, they created their own kind of system to accommodate those who couldn't afford or get access to windstorm insurance. It's been a very difficult issue for the state to wrangle all these years. One of the problems that we're seeing in that is the TWIA is having to buy so much reinsurance to be able to back itself up because of lack of the funding necessary to have a backstop. So they're having to buy reinsurance, and that's one of the most expensive ways to basically backstop their ability to pay claims. And so one of the conversations, which was amazing to me, that happened during that hearing was legislators are starting to talk about, well, we have some excess revenues from this biennium. Do we create a fund? I don't know. I don't know if that's the answer, but the point is there was interesting conversation about how do we handle the thing that's contributing to the higher premiums is the fact that these insurance providers are having to buy reinsurance at skyrocket costs because the risk is so great that it's pushing premiums up high. And I think that's kind of what's been pushing us up lately. And what can we do to help give if not just TWIA, but the state some sort of concept of where's that funding mechanism that's going to help give us a backstop so we're not having to pay for reinsurance that may be causing our premiums to go up so high. So if we can create a stable funding mechanism, then hopefully that would depress premiums.
Got it. We're going to stick with you, Trey, for this next one because we don't necessarily, here at TShack, we don't necessarily interact with the home buyer or seller directly that much. So I don't know a whole lot of the issues that may affect them. We're familiar with the NAR settlement that came out over the summer. Just curious if there are any sort of legislative initiatives that may happen as a result of that, or any other kind of buyer seller issues that we wouldn't talk about that might require some legislative action.
At this point, we're not looking at any legislative action as a result of that. We're still kind of waiting to see what all the ramifications of the settlement are and all those things. So the major change that came out of the settlement was that there's no longer any commissions being offered as a cooperative agreement through the MLS system.
Sure.
So now, as a buyer and seller, everyone has to negotiate between themselves how they pay their agents.
Mhm.
And so beforehand, it was already figured out through the listing process, and it was that compensation was already worked out from the seller's side. Now it's just the buyer's going to say, "Hey, I need some help," which they probably do need help because it's a difficult transaction. And how am I going to pay for you? So now it's an issue that they have to address in their offers and in the contracting of the sale. So that just complicates things a little bit more. We're going to have to educate people a little bit more about how that works. But the fact of the matter is, it's just a matter of them working that out and then going to the two parties and making sure all the dollars line up.
Yeah, so it sounds like policy interventions aren't really necessary or really wouldn't make that
Not
much
at this
sense.
time.
Yeah, of course. Anything on the buyer seller side that mortgage bankers might be interested in that we haven't talked about?
I haven't seen anything filed yet directly related to buyer sellers. However, we've got what, 3 months
Yeah,
for
so the bill
filing?
filing deadline. Yep.
So we'll keep our eyes open.
Okay.
There's
Uh,
only been 2,000 bills filed, or a little
Is
bit
that
more
it?
than that. That's all.
Okay, so we're, what, a fifth of the way there, maybe a third
We
of the way.
had 1,500 or so on the opening day of filing. It was a record-breaking amount of bills filed.
Yeah, racing for those low bill numbers.
And it's been a slow trickle since then, but it'll ramp up in January. I bet.
Yeah.
Okay. These next ones, we're going to go a little bit more rapid fire and just quick takes on them, although you might be enticed to elaborate, especially with this first one about interest rates, because we have kind of a volatile interest rate uh, time right now. They've gone up, they go down, they go up, they go down. We saw the Fed just cut rates, and they're forecasting two more rate cuts for 2025. They're still kind of high, although historically speaking, they're probably low. Can the legislature do anything meaningful to when it comes to interest rates, or should they at this point?
From our perspective, I don't know what the state can really do about interest rates.
Right.
I think anything they do that there might be some legislative efforts to reduce the impact of the cost of interest. When you're talking about some of the rules that they have, like for example, there's a lot of mechanisms within statute about interest payments on late fees or things like that they may try to mitigate around that because to lessen the impact of interest. There's even a bill recently filed. I can't remember by who yet, but when you have a late payer or you're having a system to pay property taxes over a period of time, or if you're late in that process, there's an interest penalty for that, and trying to figure out ways to lessen the impacts of some of those costs.
Sure.
That may be the only way I can see the statutes.
Yeah, I think if the state could do something about interest rates, they would have done it back in the 70s and 80s.
Sure.
Rates were what, mid to low teens or high teens? Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun to ask. Or when I asked my parents about their first interest rate, or even my sister, she bought a house 25 years ago. I think she had a 14% interest rate.
Yeah.
Yep. Those are great memories.
Of course, her house cost was only $78,000, so there's that.
Yeah.
The next one really took center stage last session, and that's property taxes. Made significant headway in addressing this in 2 years ago. And do you think the legislatures at this point said, "Hey, we've done what we need to do when it comes to property taxes," or do you think they're going to take another look at it this session, Meredyth?
I think they'll probably take another look at it. They've already been talking about it. I feel like every session they're like, what else can we do? How can we chip away at it? So yeah, I think we'll see. There's already a ton of property tax bills been filed because everybody wants to be the winner on the property tax legislation. There's going to be shakeup probably on the House side as far as who is chairing what committees, what faces we see on those committees, who's going to be the property tax champion. I have no idea next session, but I feel like every session, they still hear from their constituents that it's still an issue. It's still a big, part of your individual's budget. So I think, they hear from their constituents and they really genuinely do want to do something to bring more relief. So I think we'll definitely see stuff in the House and Senate on that.
So,
I agree. I think we're going to see quite a bit of discussion on property taxes. It was a big part of the election process. In addition to border security, taxes was a big thing. I think, and I've heard enough already to see that there's been a lot of conversation around, we did a historic property tax bill last session where the homestead exemption was increased to $100,000 from $40,000. And so now you're seeing even more discussion about pushing that number up higher. And then also, in addition to that, buying down the maintenance and operations for school finance. So it's the state contributing a bigger percentage of the total cost of school finance, in addition to giving homeowners a bigger exemption. I think that's a big part of the conversation we're going to continue to see.
And it's
Absolutely.
always good when you have a surplus. It's hard for the appropriators, obviously, because everybody wants a piece of that pie, but it's a really good position to be in where you can have a little more flexibility to do those type of things.
Yeah, then you're not thinking about lost revenue to the state, right? You're thinking, well, we can absorb this at this time. And so those conversations tend to be a little bit easier.
Yeah,
Except when they say, how are we going to maintain this?
exactly.
That's a good question.
Institutional investors. This came up in pretty early on in this hearing, the Senate local government hearing in November, because it was part of Comptroller Hager's remarks when he said that 28% of home sales were to institutional investors, and which is the highest percentage in the country. It also caught the eye of Governor Abbott. It's something that he tweeted about or X'd about, whatever we're calling it now. Will we see any legislation to address this, and what could that look like? Or maybe just talk about institutional investors in general as an issue. Trey, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think there is some legislation that will be brought forward again. And last session, it was a bill that didn't quite get through the process, but they're talking about bringing it back again. And that's basically just having a study. Charging Texas A&M Real Estate Research Center with the ability to do a study and provide a report to the Senate so that they have the opportunity to understand what institutional buyer impacts are to the state. Part of the challenge is, what is an institutional buyer? And so I think a lot of people hear that and they think BlackRock, or they think these big, huge mega corporations that are just buying up everything. That's not really what's happening. There was a little blip in the screen during the COVID era when there was a delta in property values and rentals and all that stuff, where there was an opportunity to jump in that. And that there was a small group that did that. But when the market corrected, they all exited. So we're not seeing a huge play from mega and institutional buyers in the marketplace. When Texas A&M Research Center did their study, they confirmed that. And I think my organization, the National Association of Realtors, also contributed to the discussion because they published an article that put that information out into the Ethernet so that people started kind of getting a little bit concerned about it. And the problem with that study was it said it categorized institutional buyers as anyone who was not a first name, last name owner of a property. So if it wasn't a personal name attached to the property ownership and it was an LLC or anything like that, they put that in one big heap and called that institutional buyers. But what that really is majority of those are mom and pop business owners buying second properties, turning them into rental properties, and making housing available to people. And you see that the majority of them own, 10, 20 of these properties, and they make that part of their retirement plan.
Sure.
And that's usually what happens in the state. And when we started looking into it, and Texas A&M Research Center looked into it, they could not find where there was a mega institutional buyer problem. And it was a very small percentage of properties owned by anyone of a significant size. So most of these properties are not, if you owned 100 properties, that's rare in the state of Texas. But that's very rare, to the point where we really don't have an institutional buyer problem. But it was certainly a news grabber, and it got your attention. But it was under false kind of definitions, because LLC is what most people buy their property to protect themselves from any claims, so that their personal financials are protected from a slip and fall on another property. So everything's contained within that LLC. And most people, if they're doing any kind of investment on a regular basis, protect themselves by putting everything they buy in an LLC. So it made it look like a big institutional buyer problem, but it really naturally isn't.
Thanks for providing that context to this issue, Trey, because that conversation really isn't happening, what you just said, right? It's an eye-catching number. More than a quarter of home sales are to these quote unquote institutional buyers. And then you take a step back and you say, well, what is actually an institution? Is it a mom and pop operation, like you said, where they're just trying to create a retirement nest egg and they're not really trying to jack up rents for whoever's going to live in that house. They're just looking at as an asset that is producing some income. But at the same time, people are kind of struggling with the cost of housing, and they want someone to blame. And they want to blame Wall Street investors. They want to blame really rich people who they think are contributing to this problem. And when you take a step back and you say, okay, what's really going on? It is exactly what you're saying, but that's not what's getting out there. So thank you for kind of dispelling this myth that may exist out there and providing some context to that. Meredyth, do you have any take on this on the institutional investor side?
Yeah, I think in the hearing, I can't remember which senator asked, but I think Hager also was like, well, it's families also with LLCs. And I think seller financiers, lots of them, or owner financiers also have LLCs in their names too. So yeah, it's not the huge, sort of black helicopter issue that it was when we hadn't already delved into it.
Right.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think these studies are good to kind of quash some of the misconceptions out there. So I'm glad the legislature did, go ahead and look into it, and the comptroller looked into it. Even another study I think would be, beneficial, because it's, it's in the ether now. And why don't we go ahead and keep taking a look at it and suss out, who the institutional investors are, and maybe, kind of categorize them as far as it's owner financiers over here, or it's these family vacation homes over here, or these folks in retirement. Get a better picture. The more information, I think, is helpful. I did see a piece of legislation filed on the Senate side to categorize what institutional investors are. And LLCs are still in there, and the legislation, I believe, would also cap how many properties one could own. It would be about 10 at a time would be the cap. So we'll see if that goes anywhere, but that piece of legislation is out there. I imagine we'll probably see more, to come in the next 3 months, but that's at least one that's out there that is directed at this issue.
Okay. The last one, and then we'll wrap up the discussion about this hearing. And this really lends itself to income restricted housing, subsidized housing. But have y'all heard of any legislation or ideas to increase state funding in general for housing?
I specifically have not. I've seen a couple bills filed to add new categories of people to, I think, is it Homes for Heroes?
That's our program.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think nurses, and I think one other
Social
category.
workers.
Yes.
Yeah.
But as far as funding, I don't know. We'll see what the appropriators do. Again, we do have a surplus, so maybe more funds could go to that. I haven't heard specifically, but also our SML is not in the budget, so I'm not. We're SDSI, self-directed, semi-independent, so we don't necessarily get involved in Senate Finance or House Appropriations discussions.
Yeah,
but,
nor do we. Thankfully.
Yeah. We'll keep our eyes open for that. But specifically, nothing's been brought to my attention yet.
Trey,
We're in the same boat.
Okay.
We haven't really seen anything specific about specific funding discussions about housing, but obviously we would be in favor of seeing a commitment to doing something in that arena, but we haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I will say on the same topic, I think it was, I went back and watched part of the hearing yesterday. I think it was Tan Parker was saying, when we think of affordable housing, there's, the two buckets are sort of the accessibility that we're talking about now, and also the traditional sense of affordable housing. And he was like, it's the lower income and middle class folks that are getting squeezed. Right. So in the traditional sense that we've, heard of for the last, 20, 30 years, affordable housing also means, the middle income, people that are getting squeezed now as well. So I think affordable housing is getting a broader definition, if you will, than it has had in the past.
It is, and also new interventions, right? Because at least the subsidized interventions have typically addressed that 30% median family income level, 60%, 80% median family income level, and then for high income earners, you typically don't need any policy interventions. But what gets left out of that conversation is this entire middle class, right? Who hasn't needed any sort of hand ups in the past, and through no fault of their own. They're just in an environment where costs are rising and escalating beyond what they're bringing home, their take home pay, and the conversations are expanding out to capture higher income categories. These next two issues are cover bills that were filed last session, and I'm curious if you think they'll return again. And these were two issues that, at least with the first one, it nearly crossed the finish line in terms of a bill. It came within one vote shy of passing the House last session, and that's the ADU issue, accessory dwelling units that would be permitted statewide on single family lots. Trey, do you think this bill is going to come back, and are you willing to prognosticate its fortune at the Capitol if you think it'll pass or get further along?
Yeah, we were pretty involved in supporting that bill, and it was disappointing to see that it didn't get across the finish line. But I do believe it'll come back. I have seen versions of that bill already filed and pre-filing now, so that already gives me some ideas that we'll at least see potentially that discussion as part of a various set of options to increase housing opportunities, increase the quantity of housing, which again, it's a supply demand thing. So if we can increase the quantity of housing, then that cost should go down, because then we don't have as much competition for whatever's out there. So that should adjust the pricing quite a bit. And that's kind of where our mindset is anything we can do to help increase housing opportunities and make it faster.
Yeah. And this is an issue where there seems to be some alignment now between what cities are doing and what the state's encouraging cities to do. Oftentimes, we've had this contentious environment between city and state are at odds, especially when it comes to land use and zoning. But in the interim, Austin allowed triplexes citywide. We've seen other municipalities kind of take their cues from the state and say, okay, the state's thinking about ADU legalization. Maybe we should do it in advance of what they're doing, as opposed to the opposite, where the city tries to do something, the state takes it away. Meredyth, do you have the same take as Trey that we'll see this again, and odds are decent that it might pass?
I think so. And I think the discussions that we're having now were sort of whispers more last session, and now it's on everybody's mind. So I think people will be taking more people will be taking a serious look at this. So yeah, I hope, fingers crossed. In my neighborhood, which is not far from here in Crestview, for years and years and years, there's been like 2 houses on so many lots. And then the one block up from me, they tore down a big house, and now there's 4 there. And I'm like, sweet, maybe I can afford something someday in this area. I'm like, I'll take a little house. I'll take it. I'll take the small one.
I mean, your attitude is kind of different than the attitude people may have had like 20 years ago, where they're thinking, oh my goodness, there's a monstrosity being built in our neighborhood. It's 4 units. Can you believe that? And now your mindset is, wow, maybe maybe more people like me can afford to live in this neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome.
Right.
So expensive. So I'm like, watching prices and walking the neighborhood and seeing houses go up, and like 2 houses where one, lot used to be. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Let me check out. Let me see how much this is. And
yeah 4 units on a lot, exciting. And like the sky didn't fall.
Yeah. Amazing.
In concert with the ADU bill is this reduction in minimum lot size. Trey, what's your take on that?
I think that'll also have some pretty big parts of the conversation. That may actually move a lot faster than, say, an ADU conversation, because it's less offensive, I think, in some ways, because the ADU conversation ended up kind of having a whole lot of pushback from the kind of the NIMBY kind of mentality of, oh, there's going to be a hotel next door. I don't want a hotel. I don't want to control it. But I think the idea is, if we can give these neighborhoods or these streets the opportunity to opt in to things like that, if there's no automatic right, then I think the city mentality of one size fits all kind of mentality may not be the approach here, and maybe let us kind of let the nuance of the neighborhood kind of dictate how that's going to happen, or if it's not going to be a by right kind of scenario. But with regard to the smaller lot sizes, I think that's been a problem that we created since the 20s and the 40s of modern housing subdivision development, and it's created a problem. The cities like it because they like the valuations, because it adds quite a bit to the taxable value, but it does put a huge strain on the infrastructure, the streets, the sewers. They have fewer taps per linear foot because everything's so spread out.
Right.
And if we have a much smarter use of the infrastructure we have in place, wouldn't that be a great idea? So maybe I'm hoping.
Yeah, that's something that I wasn't really exposed to until, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. I was listening to this developer and he was pitching the case for density in terms of how cities pay for growth, right? And pointing out kind of what the Austonian brought in on a quarter acre site versus, and how many people that houses and what it takes to service that development infrastructure wise versus kind of a low density residential development. And you have these high density developments basically subsidizing the infrastructure for low density areas. But again, that's something that a lot of people really don't ever talk about.
We can blend that throughout the neighborhoods, and
Yeah.
you can have a little high density over here and have your traditional low density neighborhoods. You can do all of those things. And I think the problem is the fear is, well, if that's the rule, then that's going to be everywhere. And I think that's something that we can probably talk about. What's the best way to implement that kind of a strategy? But it doesn't have to be everywhere.
Oh, I completely agree. And we've kind of boxed ourselves into this dichotomy between either exclusively multifamily, right? Big rental apartments, or exclusively single family, small or big lot single family homes with yards. And we all know there's a lot of gray area in between that you can fit it respectfully into a neighborhood and people aren't going to lose their minds.
Well, I see the benefits of those higher density subdivisions where the lower density neighborhoods enjoy visiting them because
Right.
they have all the nice features like great restaurants, great other things happening in those areas that are very attractive. And so it makes a lot of sense to allow these things to happen throughout a community.
Sure.
Yeah, we've got it in Crestview. We've got a set of, like, off Hardy, there's two sets of condos, and then close to that, some new apartments were just built. I think they've got commercial on the bottom. And then, like, right next to that, you just, on the other side of Hardy, like, literally across the street, starts a neighborhood, with these homes. And then you've got some that are just one house, and then you've got some that are two, and then you've got some that are four on the same lot. Lots of tear downs and rebuilding in the neighborhood. We've got it kind of all in Crestview. And I moved there like 5 years ago. I rent a house from a friend and just never thought about it. And now the more that these conversations are coming up, I'm like, oh, we've got it all over in Crestview.
Right.
We've got that mix of everything.
Meredyth, we're going to stick with you on this one because we had your predecessor, John Fleming, on our podcast in early 2024, and he was talking about this consumer issue surrounding trigger leads. And I think there might be an update on maybe the policy side of things when it comes to that. But if people aren't familiar with what a trigger lead is, maybe you can start with that and then give an update on that.
And I brought my notes with me because I want to make sure I get the
Sure.
words correct. So SML did a big rule rewrite this summer. And Fleming had brought this issue to their attention, and so they went ahead and addressed it. Trigger leads was in a piece of legislation that was wrapped into the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act on the congressional level, but it got stripped out in early December. So Texas has already enacted this rule. So the definition, trigger lead means information concerning a consumer's creditworthiness, i.e. their consumer report, compiled by a credit reporting agency obtained in accordance with Federal Fair Credit Reporting Act that is not initiated by the consumer, but instead is triggered by an inquiry to a consumer reporting agency in response to an application for credit initiated by the consumer in a separate transaction. So basically, you're going to, buy your home. You're working with a mortgage banker, a mortgage broker. They pull your credit report, and then all of a sudden you're getting flooded with all these, people that you didn't contact. And a lot of times, what we heard was consumers are thinking it's the mortgage company or the mortgage broker that is selling the information, and that's not what's happening. It's not them doing it. So they were like, can we figure out some way, to get consumers to understand, like, it's not us. So if you're going to do reach out to consumers, this is what the rule requires. If a trigger lead is used by a mortgage company, mortgage banker, or sponsored originator, the initial communication to the consumer must include the originator's name and NMLS ID, name of the mortgage company, mortgage banker, and its NMLS ID. You have to briefly explain how the originator or their sponsoring mortgage company or mortgage banker obtained the consumer's contact information, i.e. explain the trigger lead. You also have to include a statement that the originator and his or her sponsoring mortgage company or mortgage banker is not affiliated with the creditor to which the consumer made the credit application. So that's the big part for us, for these other companies to explain, hey, it's not your mortgage company,
Right.
or a mortgage broker. Then you also have to have an explanation. The purpose of the communication is to solicit new business for the mortgage company or mortgage banker, and you have to include a firm offer of credit compliant with Fair Credit Reporting Act. So Fleming had worked with SML to get this on their radar before I had joined, and then he and I worked with them while he was still on. And this ended up in the final rule that was adopted, and it is in effect.
Advocacy in action.
Yeah,
Advocacy
absolutely.
turning into a policy. We'd love to see it. Well, I appreciate that update. It sounds like it is a very consumer-friendly policy being enacted. So,
Yes, and the SML did also categorize violations of the law. So it's fraudulent, misleading, or deceptive practices, really no trigger leads. So it's misleading or deceptive practice for an originator, mortgage company, or mortgage banker to fail to provide the required information in the initial communication to the consumer for a trigger lead, to contact a consumer who has opted out of pre-screening offers for credit, or to fail to make a firm offer of credit in the initial communication with the consumer. It's also an improper practice to solicit by phone a consumer who has placed their contact information on the National Do Not Call Registry maintained by the FTC. So they've got, a little stick. With the carrot, they've got the stick there. If you are, not abiding by the rule that SML put into action, they're gonna get on you for it.
nice.
Yeah.
Was that something your members were talking about, trigger leads?
We hear complaints about it.
Okay.
And so when we would, John Fleming would reach out to us and ask us, hey, are y'all seeing this problem? We're like, yeah, our members don't like getting spammed,
Right.
basically. And so he talks to a number of us, and just like Meredyth does in our group meetings, and we say, all right, hey, are y'all seeing this problem? We're like, yep, our people don't like it either.
Right.
So that was March 4th, and they did a great job on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, right. A lot of policy talk. Is there something we didn't cover that your members care about? Policy priorities?
I think we hit the big ones.
Right.
I think some, not necessarily a policy priority that we're looking forward to support, but there are some concerns we have with some legislation that's being discussed right now. There's the discussion about and not concerns in a way that it's a terrible thing, but if it's the way it's crafted, could be a terrible thing, and that's what we're concerned about, because we're worried about its impact to the real estate ownership records, the line of title, all of those things that we're concerned about. And it's when you start talking about banning certain individuals from owning real estate in Texas, and whether you're related to or from a foreign hostile country. And so we have been trying to work closely, all of us, working closely with the elected officials to make sure that if you're going to engage in that type of legislation, there are some pitfalls along the way. One, first off, we don't want to have anything to do with anything that would be a prohibited act under the ability for anyone to own property or have us engage with them in a way that we have to understand or know their nationality or their any of the protected classes.
Sure.
So that is super important to all of us, that we don't want to have anything to do with that. And so to be able to be the policeman on the front end of that transaction, to have to ask, where's your passport? What's your nation of origin? That would be against the law for us.
Right.
And so that's something we cannot do. And so as realtor practitioners, mortgage lenders, bankers, you name it, the title individuals, everyone involved in the transaction, if that legislation was written in such a way that it would put us in on the police action on the front end, that would be an affront to a federal law that we can't cross that Rubicon. So we don't even want to. So we're not even wanting to have that conversation. But at the end of the day, if for national security purposes or state security purposes, the legislature decides that certain countries should not own property in Texas. I guess that's their prerogative, but we want to help them do that in a way that doesn't disrupt the chain of title ownership of real property, to put properties in jeopardy, if you will. I'll do a quick explanation, if you will, allow me to. But the idea here is, if you're going to do that, then there's got to be a mechanism on the back end, because just like any law, like a speeding law, has any of y'all ever speeded as a
Never.
driver? No. I haven't either. I have had some speeding tickets and they were all wrong.
Yes.
But the point is sometimes that happens. And so if you make a law that says that something's illegal, there's got to be the mechanism and unwinding or the fixing of the problem on the backside.
Right.
So we want to focus on that side. And we certainly don't want to have anything that would ban individuals of any certain class from buying property. We certainly, I think it would be okay if there was a terroristic, hostile country that the government identified that said that country could not own property in Texas. I think we would be okay with that. If it was an entity closely held by that country or part of the military branch of that country, I think we'd be okay with that. But when it comes to individuals, that's where we have to draw the line.
Right.
And we should not have any problem with any individual buying property in Texas legally. And that's what we want to have that conversation with the legislature. And if they're going to do it, let's do it in a way that you can't just make a transaction void. And if that term was kind of used in some previous versions. And if you make a transaction void, then that creates huge disruption in the chain of title. And how do you fix that? So what we're talking about is there's already existing mechanisms like putting a property in receivership, because there may be unknowing and unwitting partners to this entity that purchased property that they didn't know they might have been partnering with an illegal entity or whatever. So we want to make sure that those parties are protected, as well as the mortgage lenders are protected, or the bankers, as well as the title companies that are involved in the transaction. We want to make sure that no one gets harmed. And there's a way to unwind that transaction. That's a legal process. It's not a new process. It exists today in our legal environment. And so we're not creating something new. So that's an issue you asked, but I wanted to bring forward an issue that we're closely monitoring. We want to make sure it's done correctly, if it's going to be done at all.
Absolutely. Meredyth, anything mortgage bankers care about that we haven't talked about yet?
So we're obviously in lockstep with the realtors on the foreign ownership issue. We're also watching the AI legislation. We've been involved in those conversations, stakeholder meetings, so of like 200 other industries.
Right.
But I think we may, Caprileone has his draft legislation, hasn't been filed yet, but I think it's going to be filed sometime soon. And he had a stakeholder meeting in like May and another one recently, like a month ago. Took comments from people, and so I think there's going to be a lot of changes from the draft version that we originally saw to the one that's filed. So we're looking forward to looking into that to see if anything is going to be putting new regulations on our folks or our vendors or other folks that we work with. Other than that, we're just monitoring to see what's going to kind of poke at us, poke at our real estate trades friends. There's a whole bunch of bills I'm monitoring also where I'm like, doesn't directly affect us, but the apartments would be interested, the realtors would be interested, the builders would be interested, just so I make sure they're on my radar. So if Trey or someone else starts talking about something, I don't have like a blank stare. So I've at least been like, oh yeah, I read that.
Or just kind of fake
it. Totally. No,
right.
Yeah. There's always just random stuff we get ripped into, or a big long bill that doesn't look like it affects us, and there's one line in there that kind of affects the real estate trade. So I'm just running searches constantly.
Yeah, and you need like 20 different keyword searches because you never know where some of these policies are going to be tucked.
Exactly.
That's great. So we're done policy talk. Appreciate your indulging me in policy conversations. I could have them all day. But let's talk about, let's say one of your friends, or maybe it's one of your members, or just a lay person, if you will, who's never been involved in the legislative process, and they come up to you and they say, hey, I want to get involved somehow. Maybe it's just monitoring one piece of legislation. Maybe it's actually testifying or something like that. What's your advice to someone who's never been involved in the legislative process on what to do to get started?
I recommend they go to Texas Legislature Online, public website, and we used it all the time as a staffer, and I still use
Right.
it. I use Telecom too, but
Yeah,
still,
exactly.
like, that's my comfort zone. I still
Right.
go back and like create alerts on there. I still have alerts on Telecom too, just to like double make sure I don't miss anything. But I have given some talks recently to members, and I'm like, go to Texas Legislature Online. You can do text searches. You can watch the House and Senate floor. You can watch committees. You can set up your own alerts. You can follow the legislation. You can look. You can watch the committee hearings. You can look at the bill analysis. You can read the bill. You can look at who testified for, on or against. You can read the HRO reports. It's got all the information there. Also, encourage them to come to our Advocacy Day, which is March 24th and 25th. You'll get sort of a day in the life of me, which I may not even be able to, go do the briefing depending on what's going on.
Sure.
But I'll have one pagers and stuff. But you get to walk the halls. You talk to your members. Make sure you see your individual representative and senator. And if you got time between meetings, pop into a committee hearing or go watch from the gallery the House or Senate floor. And especially the House is interesting because it's so loud and there's so many people running around, and you get to see interesting debate. And the Senate is like much more quiet. But the House is like usually pure chaos. But it's kind of fun to see who's talking to who and who's mad at who and who's getting animated with someone and who's joking around and who's pouting. And, I don't know how they hear each other on the front and back mic. It's amazing because there's, 150 of them down there. Like,
Controlled chaos.
Controlled chaos, yes. Other than that, I tell them, email me, text me, call me if you have a question about something, if you want to know, how an issue is going, what conversations are being had. I'm open door. So just let me know.
So your lobby day is March 24th and 25th.
Yes.
That's good timing. You're after the bill filing deadline. The committees are meeting very regularly by that point, but you can still get some one-on-one time with legislators early enough in the session where you can do that. Realtor Day is one that everybody knows about because it's impossible to not notice the realtor takeover of the Granite Dome. Yeah.
Usually people ask us, all right, when's your day so we can avoid that day? I don't want to be in the Capitol that day. We have about 3,000 people show up in a
Right.
day to fill the halls, and ours is March 26th, the day after yours.
Wow. Okay.
So it'll be a bam, bam, bam. So we have March 26th. We'll have our realtor members there on the South Capitol steps at the beginning of the morning, and we'll have a lot of elected officials that are realtors come out, say hi, do a little kind of rally, if you will, and just get them all excited about what they're about to walk into and go meet with all the elected officials. We have meetings set up with every elected official in both House and Senate that day.
181.
All 181
Okay.
meetings are scheduled that day.
And what do you tell someone if they've never done this before?
Just come. And I swear you'll have fun because everyone who's been there for a first time, at the end of the day, they're like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. They are amazed. They can't believe how involved we are in the whole process, and the fact that we can have meetings set up with all their elected officials. They could go out, see them all that day, and then see what's happening on the floor, sit in the gallery, watch what's going on, see the pronouncement for Realtor Day, and all the fun things that we try to do during that day. We host a barbecue at our building, which is across the street. So elected officials, staffers are welcome to come visit. We're feeding all these people. We have an open house in our offices, and so that they have an opportunity, if they've never been to Austin before, to meet the association staff, meet all the departments, walk through there. We play games with them. We make them kind of play a little game where they go to each department and visit with everybody, and the staff's all there to support the whole issue. It's a full day effort for everybody. It's a great time, but people that have never been are just amazed. They are amazed that they have that kind of access to the state, the state apparatus that makes all the laws. And then I think they're impressed that their association's as big as it is, and how we can manage doing all these things. And typically people say nice things about the Realtor organization because we do a lot. And our members are sometimes, if they have never really paid attention to politics, because usually politics turns people off, but if they actually decide to show up to one of our advocacy days, they're blown away and they're like, oh my gosh, how can I be more involved? I love this. And so we see people start joining committees. We see them asking to be involved in the process. And like you said, Meredyth, I totally support what you said. If anyone from the public who's not a member, who just wants to follow what's going on, do exactly what you said. Look at TLO. That's a free access type website. Learn, pick up an issue that you care about, and then just show up and listen. See what the discussion's about. It's a pretty amazing process. It's very open to the public, and if you're interested, you can find a seat and be a part of it.
Yeah, and sometimes you might stumble into hearing that's not related to our industry that
That's
you're
right.
interested in, or you don't know what hearing you're walking into, and you're like, oh, I just heard a debate on mental health or whatever.
Right.
Some of our members are like, I'm nervous, I've never done this before, and I'm like, you know more than
Exactly.
most of the legislators know unless they're in our industry. So you're providing education.
Right.
So I mean, it never helps to be like, don't be nervous, because I get nervous when I have to, speak in front of groups and people are like, don't be nervous. I'm like, okay, cool. That didn't help. But if I always tell them, if it helps, you know a lot more. So you're providing education. So, you can just tell them like, this is how my job works. And this is, what I do. And this is why we care about this specific issue. And this is why your constituents care about this specific issue. I always tell them, if you can hook them, legislator or staff, with why they care or why this affects their constituents or even them personally, they'll lean into the conversation versus like, there's this bill and it does this and this and this. They're like, I've read, 10,000 bills. Like, but if you tell them, here's why this is important, here's why you care, boom, you got them.
Yeah. Telling people that they're the most knowledgeable person on an issue in that room, I think that's great advice, right? Because I think it was Malcolm Gladwell who said you need 10,000 hours to be proficient in a subject area. And your members probably have that 10,000 hour knowledge base, if not more. And the legislators have very limited time that they can devote to any X issue. So they are depending on your members to help educate them on things.
They do appreciate that a lot. And the other thing I want to add that we do is for each one of those 181 meetings, our team crafts a catered talking points and discussion point for the people who are going to those meetings that are crafted specifically for that elected official. So it's not just a blanket, here's our policy positions and blah, blah, blah. It's, oh, by the way, you voted on this bill and thank you for your support. And it's to that specific kind of detail that we have each one of those 181 meetings held. And so it's a very rewarding and enriching. And then, like you said, our members bring a ton of knowledge. And we encourage them to share their story, because sharing a story is more meaningful than just telling someone to read talking points. And so they can bring their stories to the conversation. And I tell you what, everyone I've ever met with is interested in our issues as well. I think it's going to be a big issue this session to talk about real estate issues, housing affordability. They're going to be asking, what's going on in your market? Mm-hmm. What are you seeing? Are you seeing supply increase, or are you seeing problems? What's the effect of interest rates happening on your buyers? What are you seeing? How that's playing out in the marketplace? Every meeting I have, everyone wants to know all of those things, mostly for themselves, for education, but two, because it does become an overall policy conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can say as a former staffer, Meredyth would probably agree with this too, that you're really doing the staffer's job for them too whenever you bring those leave behinds, and especially if it says the bill number, your position, and the policy reasons for why your organization has taken that position. Godsend for doing that type of work on behalf of staffers who are trying to also analyze thousands and thousands of pieces of legislation. And also, thank you for the free meals, right? If you're a staffer and you play it right, you can go about 3 months without having to pay for a meal.
And we're happy to help. We know how much work staffers do in that building, and it's a hard job with untold number of hours.
Not enough compensation.
Definitely not enough compensation. Right. But I tell you what, it's a tough job. But you're in. I'd say to our members a lot. I go, it's great to meet with the member, the elected official, but it's really important to get to know the staff and meet with the staff, because they're the movers and shakers inside those offices. They're the ones that are in the ear of the elected official saying, here's the priorities, here's what's happening. So you better get to know that staff and you better work well with them and share with them the story, because don't be disappointed if you walk into an office and the elected official's not there, because guess what? The most important person in the room is that staff.
And sometimes that staff will become an elected official.
That's right.
So make sure that you massage that relationship no matter their job title. And you treat them with respect.
That's correct.
All right, just a couple more questions. These are kind of fun ones. So Senator Betancourt, if you've watched him chair over meetings, and especially on the housing affordability side of things, he'll really try and nail people down to one policy, right? And so I'm going to pose that question for both of you. Like, if you can wave a magic wand and pass one piece of legislation, maybe two, we don't have to limit it to one, that you think could be the most effective intervention for housing affordability, what would that be? And I'll add a caveat to this, right? Trey, you opened by saying that there aren't any silver bullets for housing affordability. I tend to agree with that. But let's pretend like there's a different material kind of bullet that you think would be the most effective intervention.
We've been talking a lot about that, and we're struggling with what's really going to take the lead, what's really going to make something happen to move the ball that we need. Because we're looking at stuff like you were talking about earlier, the ADUs and the size of lots. Is it zoning regulations? Is it permitting regulations? I would say those should be part of the lexicon of the solution.
Sure.
Obviously property taxes, and only because you mentioned Senator Betancourt, because I know that's usually top of his list is property tax. And so those issues, I think, are going to be the big ones.
Okay. Absolutely. Meredyth?
Yeah, I totally agree. And if we could wave a magic wand and help insurance costs,
Right.
I think that would go a long way. That's a really hard magic wand to wave. So I think, the issues that you just mentioned are a little bit easier for, discussion and people to wrap their heads around. I mean, insurance is just so complicated and such a sort of a giant mechanism with reinsurance and everything that goes into the discussion. If we can get the supply going quicker,
Yep.
I think that'll be really helpful.
I mean, a lot of this is as simple as supply and demand,
Yeah.
right? Just helping on the supply side.
I like that. I like that idea, because a lot of it we're working on the symptoms, but really, truly, the core problem is supply. We don't have enough housing. We have 1,300 people a day moving to Texas still, and that's been a trend for feels like a couple decades now. But for a while, it was down to 900 or so is what the number was that people were throwing out there. Now I'm hearing it thrown back up. It's even higher now. So we're not building enough units to even keep up with that kind of demand, much less the growth that we're having within our own population here in Texas. So it's ridiculous how much that growth is. And if you try to figure that out on a community basis, it's a lot. And none of those communities are keeping up with the number of houses that people are moving into. So where are they going? They're either not going there and trying to find other areas to live, but they're certainly not living where they need to live, or they're going way further out and still not doing what they need to do. We need to figure out the supply problem, and I agree with you. I think if we can go back to the basic core problem, it's supply.
Yeah.
Sure. Lastly, any bold predictions for the session?
We'll have a new speaker.
That's a bold prediction. Yeah, it is at this point, right?
The regular session will end on July or June. What's the?
Oh, we're going into June this
it's-
session?
It's the first week in June.
Okay.
We haven't been into June in a while.
No.
So that's one, but
That's got to wreck people's Memorial Day
I'm
plans.
praying that we don't have the series of
Special
special sessions that we had last time.
Okay, so we're going to wrap things up in June.
That's my hope.
That's bold.
Yes,
Okay.
we're going to do it.
All right.
It's positive thinking.
Yes, let's put it in the universe.
I appreciate both of your times. Thank you so much. This is the first time we've recorded in studio space. So congrats on being the first to help us christen our little studio.
Thanks for having us here. This was great.
Thanks again, Trey and Meredyth.